So here you're just looking at an image from a retail catalog of an example of where designers might use traditional knits in an interior. So when we think of knits, we kind of think of blankets, afghans, maybe sweaters, but knitting was also used for casements, which means light window coverings. Originally, knitting, that falls kind of under this category, was used in interiors traditionally and still today, lace. And then I make a little note, there's a lot of fabric that is backed in a very light knit fabric, just for durability, to kind of keep the upholstery stabilized, etc. So last week, or a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about fibers, and we talked about silk, I recommended if silk is used for anything other than, maybe a very light open drapery, you would want to back that fabric. So sometimes that's just a small film on the back. Sometimes it's actually a knit. So there's just a couple of terms. As an interior designer, I have never used these terms. Maybe as someone who knits, you will use the term wails and courses. So this relates to, similarly, to the warp and weft directions of weaving. So remember, warp had to deal with the vertical directions, and weft had to deal with the horizontal directions. So in knitting, those terms, instead of warp and weft, are wails and courses. So knits, just by the natural way that they are constructed, have a certain stretch to them. So this is the reason why, unless backed, we don't see them used very often in interiors for things like upholstery. It's because they have a certain stretch, meaning that it can elongate or move when pulled on. So stretch. So you do have an assignment, an activity that'll be due in 2 weeks, where you're reviewing some of these knits. And I'll just let you know, you can find the majority of these knits at any craft store. So again, because they are knitted rather than woven on a loom, they have this certain amount of stretch, which makes them really nice for clothing. So there are 4 basic stitches. Honestly, I have never knitted enough TV shows where I've seen, groups of women gathering around and knitting together, and you hear them calling out the stitch pattern. They'll say knit, knit, purl, stitch, and they'll be calling that out. So it's these different stitches that create these different effects. There are differences between warp knits versus weft knits. So weft knits, not to be confused with wet knits in my little typo, weft knits are made in the weft or horizontal direction. So because of that, they go along and then they turn around and they do these again. They oftentimes unravel in that direction. Hand knitting is weft knitting. So when you see someone who's hand knitting, you see these kind of long trains of knits in the horizontal direction together. So hand knitting is a weft knitting. And they're used traditionally for sweaters, blankets, and sheeting. So for interior design, where might you see a weft knit? Well, we'll look at a couple examples. Definitely when we see those very kind of chunky knitted throws or blankets, those are knits. And for sheeting, we talked about sheeting in terms of woven sheets and thread count, but sheeting is also used in jersey sheeting, which is actually a weft knit. So it's really stretchy. It's like putting a t-shirt over your mattress, if anyone's ever had jersey sheeting. So look at that in a bit. But I do not like jersey sheeting because I like tight, taut sheets that don't move around. I like that crisp bed. And so jersey moves and wonders. So warp nets you're looking at on the the diagram on the right, and it's more about that vertical construction, that vertical direction. Also, they zigzag while they're being knitted, and this makes them a bit more stable to unraveling than the weft knit, and those are used for window and table laces and tricots, and we'll look at some example of those. So something that our textbook doesn't address, but I wanted to bring to your attention as designers. Knits are often used in backing of upholstery. So here you're looking at an embossed vinyl on the right with a knit backing. So the purpose of knit backing of upholstery fabric involves of permanently bonding a knitted fabric on the backs of the fabric. This adds resiliency and durability, and it also helps to eliminate seam slippage. Now, you haven't had that term yet, but seam slippage happens when two fabrics are joined together. So you already know that fabrics are only 54 inches wide coming off the bolt on average. So they have to be seamed or sewn together. And seam slippage happens when they start pulling together at that seam, and it's really ugly, and you've probably seen it happen many times in old vinyl restaurant booths. So you've probably seen that slippage quite a bit happen in old booths, and you've probably seen cracks in that vinyl because vinyl has come a long way since like the 1950s. So it is really good, and it helps to stabilize the fabric. But what I wanted to bring to your attention is the benefit of knit backing, but also there's a little bit of a concern. So I have ordered upholstery vinyl for restaurant booths and bar stools, right? It looks just like leather, but it's a fraction of the cost and very durable. Well, something happens that some vinyl a definite direction of stretch. And so think about that. If you're upholstering a booth and you want to tuft it, or you want to add channels to the back of that upholstery, the fabric needs to stretch in that direction. So I put a call out to my upholsterer to ask, really why that happens. But I've had to return, 30 yards of fabric, which was really expensive to ship, because the upholstery won't pull in the direction that the workroom needs it to do. So on that note, what I found is I will never order 30 yards of a bolt of vinyl ever again without first sending the fabric to my workroom so that they can see that it works before I go ahead and spend the cost of shipping to get it where I need it to go. So of the weft knits, jersey / t-shirt fabric is the simplest of the weft knits. So if you think about a t-shirt, I'm wearing one right now in cotton, it gives quite a bit, and it hugs the body, and then it kind of pulls. So that's desirable for clothing. It's not as desirable for that slippage, right? Or if you need something to be very tight and secure to an upholstered chair, for example. So you won't see jersey on upholstery unless it's heavily backed. But in interiors, you will see it for bedding. So that was my example for jersey, is jersey sheets. And so that is sample swatch number 98. A sample that you won't have as an example of weft rib knits, I don't think we have an example, is how that long horizontal knit is often used for blankets. I just found this example this morning. This is from Pottery Barn, and we've seen, and we probably have in our closets, knit blankets. I have them from my grandmother. I have my baby blanket that my grandmother knitted for me, and it's usually these very simple chain weft knits. Well, I just like this example from Pottery Barn because I feel like they updated the basic knit blanket. They did that just by increasing the size of the yarns. And so now you have that knit going across, but it just has a really a different effect just by changing it to those really heavy yarns and thick yarns. You won't use double knits that often, but sample swatch number 99 is a great example of what's called a double knit. Double weft knits are very stable, and it keeps its shape better than just the jersey. So if you compare 98 and 99, you can see that it keeps its shape once again. Because it's a knit, it has that give and that stretch, which once again makes it ideal to cover a mattress. So these are oftentimes the knits, the double knits are used for mattress pads. So, and it's basically like a double weave from previous classes where where it looks like two fabrics are woven together simultaneously. This is basically the same idea. It gives that same matelassé effect where two knits are knitted together. So swatch 100 to 102. So this is very much like pile weaves, like velvets, but this is actually knitted with that third set of yarn. So you have, the horizontal and the vertical knits, and then you have an extra set of yarns that create, just like in a pile weave, that those loops that can be cut or uncut to create that dimensional surface. So the key to these is to look at the back. So, how do we know that it's a knit versus a weave? So so fake fur number 100 of acrylic. Remember, so that's good fiber contact. Acrylic often looks like wool or animal fibers. But in the back, you can really see that chain knit. Very, very much these are used in novelty. So very rarely do we see clients want real fur throws on their bed. They prefer the synthetic fur. Maybe in a client that is more higher end, you can actually it doesn't have to be acrylic. You can actually use wool and still be, kind to animals. Swatch 101 again are what's called a fleece. So it's that gray sample. Fleeces are soft and warm. They're appropriate for bedding. So I would say as an interior designer, I have used fleece in interiors, but where do you think I probably use them? I use them in model homes for little kids' rooms if I'm doing a lodge theme or a camping theme or something like that. Because again, feel that stretch. You wouldn't want to upholster that. So probably used it for bedding and some decorative items. Finally, swatch 102 also has that same pile knit. So again, you can look at the back and see that chain link effect on the back of the swatch 102. You can see that raised surface so that you know that it's a pile. But then you're looking at a further detail, a detail that we'll get to in a few weeks. The finish has both a napped and embossed treatment. So napped meaning that it's brushed to make it nice and soft, and embossing means that a design is pressed in to the face of the fabric to give that almost reptilian effect. So then moving to some examples of warp knits. Again, those are knitted in the vertical direction rather than in the weft in the horizontal direction. And there's some examples in your textbook. So swatches 103 through 106 are examples of warp knits called tricots. It is the simplest of the warp knit. And just kind of feel in swatch 103 how stretchy this is. Again, this serves a lot of great purposes when you want something to stretch. And your textbook gives you a great example. because I was thinking, where would I use this as an interior designer? I do not know, but it cuts well. It does not run or ravel, so it's easy to work with in terms of sewing for that. But I thought, where would I want that much stretch as an interior designer? And the textbook gives you a great example. It would be used like to cover event chairs. So if you've been to a wedding and they have slip cover chairs, just over the standard, banquet chairs, they would be this type of knit. So I thought that was a great example because I kept thinking, I don't know where I would. Number 104 is a warp weave. It's brushed, so just like that napped surface, it has a brushed surface, so it's nice and soft. The wire bristles of the napping process breaks just enough fibers to create a soft and fuzzy surface. This fabric can be found in automotive headliners, airplane blankets, and small upholstery pieces. So look at how it doesn't unravel on the sides. It's pretty good. It could be easily cut. And so quickly, without it being backed or lined, I can see how the airlines could just simply cut these out and maybe serge the edge at minimal cost and offer those to their guests. So pretty nice. Again, I don't know how often I use that as an interior designer, but you can see how it could be used for novelty. Here we have another suede tricot. It's one of many imitations for suede. So more and more clients are getting away from actual using animal hides for suede on upholstery, and we're seeing more of those vegan alternatives. So there you're looking at a knit that's stable enough for light upholstery. So this wouldn't be your sectional. We'll take a look at that in a bit. This wouldn't be your sectional fabric, but this would be, I know I have this in suede jackets. When you have those very lightweight suede jackets, that's probably what you're looking at. So Bobby, it doesn't tell us what fiber 106 is, but I'm sure you can guess, just like you did before. It's that shiny, furry fabric. It looks minky, like a minky rose. Another knit is the Rochelle, and it's the knitting process. It's the machine that's used to create very complex knits on the machine. Sometimes they're laces, sometimes they're mesh, sometimes they're nets. Most of the time they're used using a filament yarn versus a cotton, but occasionally you'll see some done in a natural fiber. So swatches 107 through 1010 are some of those examples. So most of you probably have heard this term, tulle. Swatch number 107 is an example of tulle. So I've never heard as an interior design really the term a Rachel or a Rochelle, but you do hear the term tulle, or tooling. So if any of you have been part of wedding planning, you might have tooled up with all the decorations for shears and canopies and stuff for weddings. So what makes a tulle is that it has that net-like structure with a diamond or hexagonal opening, and it has that really stiffened finish. So it is great for special events. 108 is more of a traditional lace-like structure, again machine made. So for all of the interior designers that have a lace line in their collection, I like Ralph Lauren. So when we get to our final project and you're going to do a project based on a style, if you have a traditional style that you want to maybe add a bit of beautiful lace that's not like purple, that looks very traditional, Ralph Lauren, who is sold through Cravat Fabrics, has beautiful lace examples.